Hey, welcome back, everybody. This is Rob Robinson with Philosophy from the Frontline. Hey, today's topic is going to be Ranger School. So I got a text message from a buddy of mine last night, and he was like, hey, look, my friend's son is just made it into the course. You got any pointers for him that's going for anyone that's going through the course? And it was like, yeah, I sent him a text message, kind of outlined it, but it's like, you know what? I have a pool of instructors that I can pull together and kind of chat about this. And so, you know, what makes us an expert? We're not, because Ranger School is constantly changing. It's just like combat. It's just like everything. But there are certain principles about the course that will always remain the same. But I have two former Ranger instructors. I got Dave and Dale on. Dave was at 4th Battalion with me. Dale was in the mountains for a little bit, which is an interesting place as well. I have the distinction of being one of the few people that served in multiple areas of the Airborne and Ranger Training Brigade. So I was the S3 at 507th, I was the XO at 6th, and I commanded a company in 4th RTB. So, you know, we have a little bit of experience in understanding how everything goes. And, you know, the two biggest things that I did while I was at RTB was, one, T11 transition into the basic airborne course. So for those of you guys that have jumped to T11 and never jumped to T10, you have missed out. But I was part of that at the 507th. And then, of course, we ran the last T10 drop in TRADOC at 6th RTB when I was XO down there, which was kind of a cool thing because if you know anything about basic airborne refresher, you can't run basic airborne refresher without the right stuff. The guys had already gone through T10 transition, so we got an exceptional policy through the commanding general to allow those cats to jump the T10 one last time as they were going into their FTX in Florida. But all that being said, we're going to give you some pointers, some tips, and tell some war stories about working at Ranger School, and then kind of talk about, you know, some of the things that are important so you don't trip yourself up. And again, take it for what it's worth. We're a bunch of old guys, but we've been there, done that, and literally have the t-shirt. I'm wearing one right now. So we could talk about what's going on with Ranger School.
Let it go, man.
No, it's never going to happen. You know, it's like your Spartan Crimson.
If you give students up your Crimson, need to understand that there's a behind the scenes.
But Dave, let's talk about your time at 4th. And I know that there are some things that I noticed when we were down, that I was down there that made the course a little bit interesting. And of course, the hardest part of the status, you know, and Dale, when you were instructor, I think when you were there, they still did 0 week. 0 week was a royal.
You know how much sleep you had. We know if you.
And I say that
it's the filter.
Yes, it was. It kind of allowed you to kind of push.
We know how much food you've eaten.
Yeah, it allowed you to do a check on training, you know, so you had people that were showing up for the course, and that's one of the things that always happens
because
people show up to the course.
Are leaders too.
They're not the right packing list
and we need to know the capabilities,
like
the status.
You can get thrown out of that course for something as simple as a haircut, right? And that's the thing that people don't understand because they've never experienced it.
Hey, they're going on 3 days. No,
purely at the numbers of Ranger School, you know, about 2% of the country serves, and about 2% of the Army goes to Ranger School.
We know these
things.
Look
at the size of the force, so there's a lot of
PT shorts. Hold them up.
Yeah, they still have those.
Sergeant, I don't have my PT shorts.
Correct, and the old shakedown
That's right.
is one of the things that at least 0 week allowed you to fix. Right, so if you identified a shortfall in your packing list or something like that, you were able to get it corrected without being removed from the course or receiving spot reports, because when it came time for that major shakedown in 4th Battalion, you know, you got screwed.
Last food
we'll
for
pause
thought,
there, Dave. Like, what were your thoughts? It's just general overview of 4th Battalion Darby phase.
Weapons and equipment as a student. 24/7, 365.
Well, I mean, I came
Nothing will screw your patrol over quicker than losing not being able to
went pre-ranger, 0 week,
for personnel.
And then I went into my class. I was 1100. It was the last class of 2000. And I hadn't, eliminating 0 week. I mean, it seemed more like an accountability type of week for other guys that were coming in from far away units, just like we were talking about earlier, with ID, you know, just to get on that bird to go and participate in the school. I mean, your stuff had to be wired like tight, like a Swiss watch. And then you've got everybody there's like that give people to show up for the actual start date. Is the school itself, I mean, in the end, I think having a good realization as to what that school really is what set me up for going in. And like you said earlier, Rob, it is a leadership school. It isn't like going off to train SOC P or what have you. It's about how good of a leader are you without food, water, sleep, and most importantly, this is the big one because we were just talking about it rapidly, without encouragement. And this is something a lot of people aren't privy to. I can't tell you how many times we had men that came from special forces that wanted to get their triple canopy. And man, there they are at the layout coming up to me and say, "Hey, Sergeant, I don't want nothing to do with this." And I'm like, "I'm sorry, what, are you struggling with getting yelled at? Fall the fuck back in," you know. They can't handle it. It's not a gentleman's course by any stretch of the imagination. You think Gun Master School, everybody's polite to you. This isn't CAG selection where everybody's sweet as can be. No, it's a whole other animal. And I think that's one of the things that once I had that in perspective, I think the rest of that really came together when I was out there with Ranger. I wasn't out there to be their friend. I was out there to lead them to hit an objective and to do so with the greatest amount of success possible. And that, of course, is measured by what you've destroyed as far as your mission parameters and who all you brought home with you. And that doesn't look like your morning cup of coffee. The other thing I'd say about Ranger School is when it comes to preparation is having to walk, not just a certain distance, but all day, every day. And it is vastly different than any other school you're going to go to specifically for that reason. And it's hard to train for. It's hard to prepare for. Something I wish somebody had told me before I'd ever gone in, is to put on a couple extra pounds. You will lose weight. It is the number one weight loss program in the country. And if you don't sustain calories, it definitely affects your outcome in that school. There's no getting around it. That's just my blurb off the top of my head.
Yeah. And you made some good points. You know, like the first part of it is like unsupervised. It's like, hey, look, Ranger School is not a course where everybody graduates. You know, it is a bloodletting, right? On average, on a year, you're between 46% and 52%, graduation. And 52% is like a banner year. Like, oh my gosh, we had 52% of the students graduate. And that's mind numbing to most people because who wants to go to a school where everybody's going to fail? You're going to have a better than 50% chance of failure. But the reality of it is better than having a 50% chance of failure in Ranger School means you have a 70 to 90% chance of success in combat. And that's what is missed in the whole discussion is like people just forget that, it's important. The number of times. Go ahead, Dave.
I was just going to say, I think that's an outstanding point. If there's anything I really, academically, I suppose, learned from Ranger School is variable control. The battlefield has variables all over it, dude. And your success or failure is definitely surmised by your ability to control those variables. And we do that where? In planning before the fight. And nobody, and I mean nobody, plans like Rangers do.
Yeah.
None of them.
Very true.
When Special Forces guys are sitting there in their little safe house out in the show, what are they doing to put together their operations order? They're breaking out the Ranger Handbook.
Yep.
Straight up.
Yeah.
Yep.
The Ranger Handbook has always been a guide, and even with all the evolutions into currency, it's still valid as an op order format. Like, just follow the checklist, man. It's not that hard. They also, speaking of variable control, one of the variables that gets added when you transition from Derby to the mountain phase is mountains, right? Military mountaineering at 5th Battalion, personal experience sucks, right? Chris Cofferson says it in an interview many, many moons ago. They asked him, was like, hey, what was the most difficult day of your life? And he's like, day 3 of mountains,
Yeah.
And that's true.
Mountain stuff.
And so one of the things that we did when I was a student, and this was in, this was 99, we used to do the infiltration into the mountain camp, right? So you would land up on Hawk Mountain and then you'd walk down in, and you would have thought that you died and went to heaven because you're flying over this beautiful country in the Appalachians, and then you land and then you're walking down into the Ranger camp. And what you don't realize is you're at 7,000-8,000 feet and you're walking to 6,000 feet. And then you stay there for the entire time that you're in the course. But Dale, I know you've got a lot more insights on the mountain phase. So kind of open up and give us the goods on mountains.
So, one of the things that I think is really good about this talk about is we not only have 3 RIs two RIs and an RI commander / ops officer. So we've got multiple views of the school and experiences of the school, but we also have multiple generations of Rangers. You guys, Dave went through the last class of 2000. When did you go through, Rob?
I graduated 599.
99. So I graduated 1291. I graduated an entire decade before you guys. So we've got 3 generations of Ranger instructors who can, talk about the growth and the change that went through Ranger School. I was an RI I was in the mountains from 93 to 97. I graduated in the last class of 91. I started out as a buck sergeant in the Ranger Support Platoon, also known as the Op 4. Then was an RI in Charlie 1 up in the mountains. Shattered my ankle, had to have some reconstructive surgery, so wound up becoming my last year. I was in the S3 office working with the FTX branch, running the FTX portion. That's a little bit of my professional assignments within the RTB. I wanted to expand on something because David said it, and everybody says Ranger School is a leadership school, and it is. But for some reason, that term leadership school seems to diminish what Ranger School is. Because even though it's the appropriate term, everybody's like, well, PLD or, Warrior Leader course is a leadership school. So here's what differentiates Ranger School from Special Forces Selection, Special Forces Q course. Here's the thing. All these other tactical schools are there to teach you military tactics, operational tactics, and that is the major component of Ranger School. You're there to learn to build upon your baseline understanding of the infantry and rifle platoon manual 7-8, which a huge portion of SH 21-76 takes its information on and builds on. Here's the kicker on Ranger School. This is what makes Ranger School a leadership school. The school is designed and has always been designed to destroy you physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, to break you down to your basic human instincts, and then evaluate how you perform when you're can you overcome the self-serving, self-survival mindset and rise to the occasion to either lead or be a follower in accomplishing the operational mission. Yes, if you're successful in the operational mission, that's a bonus. But you can be successful. You could be the greatest platoon leader, Ranger student in the world and still be a failure because you're a spotlight Ranger. As soon as you're out of that leadership position and you're just Joe Knucklehead Rifleman, you're the guy that everybody's having to try to keep awake.
Yeah.
So it not only teaches and evaluates your tactical abilities, it more critically evaluates who you are. And these are the things that you cannot learn, and these are the things that you cannot hide from. Ranger School will expose you as you're either someone who has what it takes to be to be malnourished, no sleep, physically worn the hell out, and still be able to plan, coordinate, organize, resource, and execute a mission. And motivate your troops to do it as well. Because that's where the leadership comes in. Because guess what? You're in a platoon of 60 soldiers, and they're sucking just as bad as you are. How do you get them to be motivated? Because you've got the motivation of shit, I need to go. How do you motivate everybody else? So that's the leadership part of it. As for mountain phase, anybody worth their salt will tell you mountains is where Ranger School starts, because that's where you start really getting broken off physically. That's where you start feeling the hunger pains. That's where your body starts responding to not being fed, not getting sleep. And oh, by the way, you're hanging on the end of a rope with your buddy strapped in on your back because you're doing a rappel medevac. Your life is on the line, and you've only had 3 hours of sleep. So the Mountain Face really starts bringing that home to you. So anyway, that's kind of what I wanted to build on, is what Dave was saying. Is to those that are listening to this, don't think that when we say Ranger School is a leadership school, that it's like, oh, it's a leadership school, I'm a good leader. Because the one thing you can't train for is your basic instincts.
Yeah.
And that's what Ranger School will expose. You can train physical, you can road march, you can run, you can land nav, you can get in the, peak physical performance of your life. But if you are instinctively self-serving, you will fail. And it will expose your character flaws.
Yeah, it definitely.
And that's a great way to put it, because there's a lot of people out there that don't understand servant leadership. Yeah. And you can't be a self-server and get past rap week.
Yeah.
No.
Well, and
just can't happen.
And that's why peers matter so much, right? And everybody's like, well, why do we do peers? Right. Why do we do peers? And so much so to the point where the Army adopted the 360, the 360 evaluation, which was a good idea in theory, but it was also a colossal failure because, again, when you did the 360 assessment, you're not going to ask people that don't like you to fill the damn thing out. You're going to ask people that that you have a working relationship with in the hope that they're, going to fill out something positive for you. Whereas in peers, like when you're broke off, and then you usually have a little bit more honesty. And one of the things, and I know Dave has witnessed this, because as a company commander, the RIs are just like, hey, fill your stuff out, right? That's their job, is to enforce the standards of the course. As a company commander, I'd be walking through the Derby Dome and saying, hey guys, tell the truth. Write what you need to write. Like, hey, look, in peers, there's 2 things that I know. You want to get rid of the guy that sucks in your squad. And if you don't know for sure, peer the foreign guy, because we're not going to kick him out. Right? Like, that was basically the rule of the board.
That's the basic rule.
I'm telling you all now, as the man who used to have to read all that shit from every single class, I will say that I think peers is probably one of the greatest things that they have in any Army school. If you ever want the most brutal, honest assessment, you ask the lowest joker on the totem pole. And you tell him, look, you're anonymous. There's absolutely 0 consequences to what you write. Put it out there on that paper. Now is the time. And man, brothers, you're going to hear it. Oh. You're going to hear it in all its glory. I've read some of the most unbelievable. Imagine some kid, you just gave the performance of your life and you think you're the bomb, and some kid, instead of saying, courage, candor, leadership, physical attributes, whatever, instead of writing a bullet down for each one of those, he just uses that entire thing like a piece of notebook paper and says, this ranger right here, just standing there staring into space with his glasses on his face, crooked, knowing just which piece of firewood to put on the burn barrel. That about summarizes that dude's usefulness in his entirety.
Yeah.
That joker ain't never heard that crap before in his life.
Yeah.
Probably because he could have been a senior NCO or an officer, and somebody's saying, hey, look, you bossing people around don't make you shit.
Yep.
And a lot of guys don't know that going into that school. And they need to hear that.
Yeah. Well, I used to say this all the time. Like, this was my pitch before we did the buddy run. I was like, hey, look, you're here at Ranger School for a reason. If you're a junior enlisted guy, you're trying to tell your team leader and your squad leader that you're a good teammate and you want to move up. If you're a staff sergeant, if you're a staff sergeant or sergeant first class, you're trying to move up to the next leadership position in your organization. If you're a master sergeant or an officer, you're trying to prove yourself. Because there's no way in hell that a master sergeant should be coming through Ranger School unless there's a purpose to it. And and we saw all kinds. We saw all kinds. I saw a lieutenant colonel come through who was a pretty prolific general's aide. And that guy was a freaking whirling dervish of douchebaggery. And I did everything that I could to run that guy out of the course. Why? Because he wasn't there for the right reason. You're a lieutenant colonel.
That's right.
You're a lieutenant colonel.
You could have been there as a lieutenant.
Well, and by the way, this was 2014. So it's 2014. There's been a war going on for years, and you're ducking out to go to Ranger School when there's a war going on. Yeah. Like at some point, even back in the 60s, they used to give constructive credit for combat patrols in Vietnam, right? And they used to hand out the Ranger tab. That's a rumor. maybe it's not. I think it's more true than anything else. But guess what? We had a bunch of...
It happened in On-K.
Yeah.
On-K Vietnam was the in-country Rangers.
But there was but there was something that was said to me a long time ago. And if you guys remember General Ferreter, like Mike is like a legend, and he's got a great podcast, and he's doing a lot of stuff in the veteran community. But one of the things that he used to say is, like, you're going to run into people that have the Ranger gene. They may not have a Ranger tab, but they have the Ranger gene. And the Ranger gene is somebody that is a selfless leader that is willing to accomplish every mission that they can and bring their boys and toys home or die trying. And like when he said that to me all those years ago, it was like, damn, like that is a brilliant way of looking at it. Because again, it's not that graduating from the course makes you different in the sense that you're better than other people. It just means that you're more aware. I think it's the self-awareness that comes from, breaking yourself off in a course like that than, the guy that, well, I went to Pathfinder school, or I went to Air Assault, or I went to, all these other courses, and it kind of just happened to work out for them. But what did they really learn about leadership or leading in duress, while you're in combat, or at least a simulated combat situation?
I've had a unpopular view, and I don't know if this is either one of you, and I hope it's not. And maybe it's my own personal snobbery, because I went through Ranger School as a private, and I've just always viewed that if you're going to Ranger School and you're not going to be doing the Ranger job, meaning the Ranger job is really that team leader and that squad leader. Everything above that, platoon sergeant, but that Ranger job is that team leader and that squad leader. And if you're a staff sergeant just trying to get promoted to sergeant first class, if you're someone that is waiting until the 5-yard line to sit there and go, oh man, you know what? I need to get this school so I can get promoted. In Dale's humble opinion, that's the wrong reason. You're going to school for the wrong reason. And I can tell you, I've worked for guys that were like that. And one of those guys became the 18th Airborne Corps G3 Sergeant Major. And I was his current ops, Joint Operations Center, NCOIC, for the 18th Airborne Corps. And he looked at me, and I was a master sergeant by this time, and he looked at me and he goes, dude, you are not a Ranger anymore. You need to let that shit go. And I just looked at him and I said, and that's the difference between you and I. I went to Ranger School to become a Ranger. You went to Ranger School to get promoted.
Yeah, I would tell you. And I never turned it off. I never turned it off.
On that,
never turned it off ever.
On that note, Dale, I did not go until I was a staff sergeant. My reasons were different.
And there are different reasons. Because there's some school guys that just, the opportunity does not present itself.
Well, it's not that the opportunity always presents itself. Every single commander wants somebody to go to Ranger School from their unit. They get a big return on investment. It's not like they're running off to go SFAS where they send them off, they miss them, they still got to carry them on their books. Yeah. And when they finally complete it, they never get them back. Right. Ranger School is vastly different. What I was getting at was the reason that I wanted to go is I thought I was great at my game. And I spent a lot of time already being deployed, but at one point I wanted to know. Everybody talks all this mad shit because they think they're tough or they think they're good. Not all Rangers are good either.
Nope.
But I did want to know, to me it was like getting my PhD in friggin' infantry. And I had kind of thought that way. This is when I came back to my second tour, in Fort Bragg. And I was looking to be the airborne leader. And at some point, something about that stuck. If you want to lead troops in the 82nd, man, you have to be a Ranger. Dude, you must be a jump master. That's how you lead those soldiers.
That's
one of the greatest thing that I took from that was, man, I got a lot of holes in my game, and I need to tighten that shit up. And I'm glad I did it. Yeah.
And I'm not, and like I said, I'm not bashing,
No, I get it.
Everybody's different. It's, right. And so I'm not saying that you're the guy that I'm talking about.
No, but I understand completely who you're talking about because there's plenty of them.
Yes.
You got the ones like you said, they did it just because they're hoping to make that next E7 board. Maybe they'll pick me up now and see my shoulder when I pose for my DA photo and they'll think I'm the bomb. Man, there's doucheries like that everywhere, bro, for sure.
And there
but
are.
The ones, but at least they finally go. Some of them get a reality check. Some of them don't. The ones that really get me are the ones that are, well, I'm just so freaking great. I don't need Ranger School to be a great leader. This is all a bunch of bullshit. And more importantly, look at my damn command sergeant major who never went, telling everybody to go.
Yeah. Well, what was funny?
And that was a big thing, especially on the street during the time frame that you were there. Because every single sergeant major on the street in the 90s, not one of them had a damn Ranger tab. Not a one. And they were preaching to every single JoJo on the street, you're not the complete airborne soldier unless you have that. And I think that really didn't do the 82nd any favors.
Let me tell you the mindset of the 82nd when I was there, because I was in the 82nd from 89 to 93. When I came back from HUA school, I immediately was sent to the E5 Sergeant's Board. And everybody on the board, to include my Sergeant Major, he was Ranger qualified. But there was one, the HHC First Sergeant was not tabbed. And so I did the board, and it was the most ridiculous board I'd ever done. I was actually a little embarrassed because I studied very hard, like in true Ranger fashion. I had everything down. And literally, I was asked one question by each member of the board. One of the questions was, can you tap dance? And I was like, what do you mean? They were like, can you tap dance? And I was like, well, I can try. And they said, well, do it. And I'm sitting here literally in class days in jump boots. Tick, 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 tick. That was the kind of questions I got asked. I was a little embarrassed. But then because I was in the Scouts, my first sergeant, when it came to him his turn to ask questions, the battalion sergeant major was like, okay, no more questions. You're dismissed, Roberts. And I grew up in that time frame of, that's my first sergeant. So after the board, one of the other first sergeants who was one of my mentors, I went up to him and I said, hey, First Sergeant, what the fuck was that? And he goes,
we just lost him.
What? And I was like, you guys didn't ask me anything of significance.
Yeah, he's frozen. There he is.
And can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you back now.
Now we can, yeah.
Okay. I was like,
left off with talking to the first sergeant with the board. You were already walking out of the room.
Okay, so I asked First Sergeant, I was like, what was that? And he goes, and I was like, I studied hard for this board, and you guys didn't ask me anything. You didn't evaluate my knowledge as a sergeant. And I said, but more importantly, why wasn't my first sergeant allowed to ask me any questions? And he goes, he's not tabbed. He's got no business asking you questions. And I understand the sentiment of it, but it also undermined my first sergeant. And as you and all of us know, as Rangers, you never undermine your leadership.
Yeah, that's a fact.
And here was 4 Ranger senior NCOs and 1 non-Ranger senior NCO, and the 4 Ranger NCOs violated that unwritten rule.
Well, regardless of their participation in a school external to their unit, I mean, that first sergeant still has to answer for you. Period.
Yeah.
And shame on those 4, every last one of them, for acting like such snobs towards him. And quite frankly, that's humiliating. That's like humiliating your peers to your subordinates.
Yeah.
And
that was the mindset
that's as sad as
back
it gets,
then,
dude. Yeah.
That was the
primitive.
That was the mindset back then. If you did not have I could be walking around and a staff sergeant that wasn't tabbed, or I was a buck sergeant, a staff sergeant that wasn't tabbed, especially because I was in the sniper squad of the scout platoon, he didn't even look at me. He knew the mindset was he had no place in saying anything derogatory towards me, even if he was right, like the on-the-spot correction. And let me tell you, as a young buck sergeant, looking back, I say that was wrong. As a young buck sergeant at the time, I walked around like a peacock because I knew the only person that would ever say shit to me had a tab. The good old boy society was vicious in the 90s. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah.
We're not talking about school. We're talking about
well, I mean, but that's but the other piece of it is that's part of it, right? So when I got to the Big Red 1, I had a first sergeant that was running around and thought he was hot shit because he had a 82nd combat patch, right? And he's like, oh, I do the triathlons and I swim and I do this and I do that and blah, 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 blah. And I looked at him one day and I was like, hey, First Sergeant, got a question for you. If you're so physically fit, why didn't you ever go to Ranger School or Jump Master for that fact? Because you're wearing an 82nd combat patch, you might as well take that off because you're telling on yourself, right? Because there are certain levels of performance that the expectation that we have as, coming from a certain organization, coming from the 82nd, graduating from Ranger School, there are certain expectations of skills that you're supposed to have. And so from a perspective of like what happened to you, Dale, yeah, that sucks that they marginalized one of your, a senior NCO because he hadn't gone to school. But does that mean that he didn't have experience? No,
because First Sergeant Bronson was brilliant. But the reason he was the HHC First Sergeant was because he wasn't tabbed. And that was also the standard back then for officers and enlisted. If you were not tabbed, you would not have a leadership position within a warfighting element of the battalion. That's where all the non-tabbed XOs went. That's where all the non-tabbed company commanders went. That's where all the non-tabbed staff officers went. If you were a first lieutenant without a tab and you were infantry, welcome to being the S4 platoon leader.
And I understand that. And again, that's part of the like the subculture of organizations. And that's something that you can't change. But when you get to the course, man, one of the things that I was asked is just pointers. What are the pointers that you have? And one of the pointers that this was crazy because, again, Fort Riley was just like the doldrums of my career, but there was also opportunities to actually make a difference. And there was a young man.
Fort Riley.
Yeah, I used to do jiu-jitsu with this guy, and he was the cockiest dude ever, like cockiest white belt you'd ever see in the world. And he won a couple combatives tournaments, so he had this chip on his shoulder because he was a cadet at K-State. So he gets commissioned infantry out of ROTC, which is a hard thing to do at the time. And he went to Bolick, went to Ranger School, and this kid kept failing and kept failing and kept failing. And what was funny was his parents lived in the same neighborhood as I did. So I'm walking down the street one day, and his dad stops me. He's like, hey, man, do you mind, could you talk to my son when he gets home for block leave? So this kid left in the summer. So, he started Ranger School in May. Here we are in November, and he's still in the course. Like, dang, man, what the hell did he do?
Man,
hardcore.
Right. But this was back. But this is back in the day when they let you hang around for a while because this is, hey, you either go to Ranger School or you go to war. And hey, sometimes we're willing to keep a guy a little bit longer in the course before he goes out there
to do the grind.
Well, yeah. Plus, that and it keeps a bunch of hooas from getting mowed down too, right? So if this guy's this guy's a jacked up Muldoon, putting him in a platoon could be dangerous for the people that he's leading. And so, essentially, I did what all good Ranger instructors do. Like, hey, look, I called down there, called a student ops. I was like, hey, man, pull this kid's file for me. So they pulled it for me, gave it to me. Like, this kid was 3 and 2 on patrols every phase that he was in, but he boloed peers every time. And the reason why he boloed peers every time was because he was that guy. Like, I'm Spotlight Ranger. I do what I'm told. And then when I'm not, I'm arguing with the squad leader or platoon sergeant or whatever about tactics. It's like, look, dude, nobody gives a F about your tactics. You're a freaking second lieutenant. You don't know much. And if you're not helping people out, then why are you there? That's your sole purpose in life is if you're not trying to get everybody else their go. So the biggest piece of advice that I gave him and is universal for all people that are going to Ranger School is simply this. When you're in a leadership position, be the best leader that you can. And when you're not in a leadership position, continue to be the best fill in the blank, whatever it is, whether that be weapon squad leader, team leader, radio, RTO, or rifleman or member of squad. You do all those things to the best that you can. Because if everybody is pulling for the other person who's in a leadership position to get their go, your patrols go a hell of a lot easier. And
yeah, they do.
That's one of the things that people don't learn. Or if they do learn it, they forget. And then here's a little trick of the trade for those of you guys that don't know. Find out what camp you're in and figure out what the RSP call sign is and walk next to your Ranger instructor. So you will always know when you're about to get ambushed because they'll be talking to the Merrill's guys. And then you can make adjustments to your movement.
That's insider trading on school.
Hey.
Shame on you. That's OPSEC.
That's not OPSEC. I did that when I went through as a student, and the RIs were like, "Why are you always ready for actions on contact?" And it's like, "Sorry, you don't want to know that." They're like, "No, tell me."
I think
I'm a boy. I was a Cub Scout and a Boy Scout before I was a Ranger. Always be prepared.
Yeah, I think you really nailed something there, Rob. You know, you're talking about a guy, and what you just described without saying it out loud is that guy was a very toxic leader.
Yep.
Period.
Yeah.
You know, and nobody wants them. Let's say, I mean, you can be 100% on soldier skills, but man, if you're toxic, I mean, sure, you can get there to the objective, but nobody wants to deal with you.
Yeah.
You know, and I never, you know, if you want to deal with anybody, you want to deal with somebody who at least has some malleability to them.
Yep.
And you know, and yeah, the Ranger School is a leadership school. Having said that, you also better learn how to follow too, because it ain't always about you. You know?
Well, and that's
all those guys that you're out there running around with in the tree line. They're doing everything they can to make sure you get your go.
Yeah.
And you have to be there for them.
Yeah, Rangers
you can't just sit there and then flop there on your rock feeling fucking sorry for yourself while your peers are trying to get their grade.
Yeah, Ranger School is a team sport.
If you don't know what that looks like, that's exactly what that looks like.
Yep.
You need to have on your feet, rifle in hand, ready to frickin' move at a moment's damn notice, and the only thing that dude should be hearing from you is, you got it. I'm on it. Boom. Ain't nobody getting past me.
Roger.
And there's a lot of that. And as time goes on, Mountains is a perfect example. You get that one leader who's just so scared of actually using his skill that instead of doing, let's walk the ridge line. No, that joker walks mountaintop to mountaintop to mountaintop to get to his damn objective. And you can bitch at him all day, but at one point, mission's going down. You got to learn how to support him too.
Yep.
It's going to come back.
One of the best things that can evaluate a patrol leader is what does his left and right flank security do when they're out there at the objective. Yep. And let me clarify that. Your left and right flank security is just two guys, maybe three, out on the left and out on the right by themselves away from the patrol. Their job, as we know, is to close off the objective as early warning for reinforcements and prevent anyone from leaving the objective. They're away from everybody. If those guys, if you're the patrol leader and you're a dickhead, those guys are not going to give a shit and they're going to go to sleep.
Yep.
But if those guys are out on the left and right flank security and Dave's the patrol leader and they're like, dude, hold on, they're like, dude, Dave busted his ass for us when we're in charge.
I'll pile on to that one. One of the things
they're going to motivate.
One of the things that used you and Dave
to work there for you, so you can get your
during that last patrol.
Because they know if the left and right flank security falls aslead, there's a no-go.
He's rebooting.
Okay, but I remember that we used to do that all the time. Is we would blow out the Bravo Team Leader 2 on a recon. And the reason why we would blow out the Bravo Team Leader 2 on a recon, regardless of how successful the actual Alpha Team Leader and the Squad Leader was to grade exactly that. Because that's one of the areas where guys get over, right? If you're Bravo Team Leader 2, you take a nap, nobody's going to be here. All I got to do is make sure that the rucksack plan is in place when the squad comes back. So we'd blow those cats out. And as these guys are running back into the patrol base, guess what? Like, oh crap, like Bravo Team Leader 2 is on his neck. Squad's not ready to move. Guess what? I can give that guy a no-go. If you get a Bravo Team Leader 2 no-go in Ranger School on a recon, you suck something awful because that is the easiest grade in the course.
Oh, in Darby.
Yeah.
Fact.
Easiest grade in the course.
Wish I had it.
Yeah. True statement.
It is what it is.
True statement.
Yeah.
But, as we're waiting for Dale to come back, if he can jump back on, is one of the things that I would also want to pass out is like when you're on your 8-hour break, and this was really what started the whole thing with the text message was, all right, Dale's back. But as part of
there we go.
Oh, no worries. But as part of the 8-hour break, what do you do during that break time? For us, it was like, hey, get all your stuff clean, replenish all of your TA-50 items that got broken, lost, or damaged, and get yourself clean. And I don't know if they wear camouflage in Ranger School anymore, but I know our generation, we wore it and we camoed, if it was exposed skin, it got covered with something. And I watched guys get, dropped from the course or get freaking major minuses for coming back with like camo streaks on their neck. And so that's one of the things that it's a generational thing, but one of the things that you have to be cognizant of is like, hey, look, it's that whole care of equipment thing. And whether you agree with it or not, you're a piece of U.S. government equipment. So if you come back dirty and stinking, you're not, executing care of equipment, which is one of the tenets of the Ranger Creed. But go ahead, Dale.
Quite frankly, it falls into how it is explained by your RIs down in Darby. What you're talking about is simply task to subordinate units. And it's and it's taught best in Darby because what does it do? It teaches everybody every single phase of the operation. And that's important, especially when you're so depleted like you get, especially when it comes time to end up in mountains. Because now you're not struggling to remember every little damn detail that you have to do in a strange environment. Everything should already be familiar to you while you're on the walk. And that's the entire point of it. That changes from squad level to platoon level, In doing so, if you're taught, instead of now task to subordinate units as a squad leader, you might be talking about everybody's position as a rifleman or as a saw gunner or whatever in tremendous detail. But as a platoon sergeant or as a platoon leader in mountains, I might talk about the squads in that way. And what you might not realize when you're in Ranger School is that prevents you from robbing your squad leaders being able to lead their own squads, because they have to do that too. So this gives them all the space that they need to exercise their ingenuity and initiative, right? We don't really much understand. You understand that in Ranger School. You don't really understand that growing up on the street.
Well, and the other
especially
part,
for leaders that haven't been to Ranger School, because they don't know how to develop their junior leaders in that way specifically. And so what happens? They get robbed every time they turn around. They get robbed of their ability to impress anyone with their initiative and ingenuity. And what does it do? It's detrimental on the street.
Yeah.
It's detrimental even in the senior ranks, just like your first sergeant who got pushed out of the club, right?
Oh, and the other part of it is it's the 1/3.
Exactly, yeah.
It's a 1/3, 2/3 rule, right? And this is where the Army has gone woefully wrong, right? Because what has happened? Like, well, I have to put in a con op for me to go outside the wire, sir, and I got to do this, and I got to do that, and I have all these other 87 requirements that I have to do just to conduct a standard movement to contact operations order, right? And the reason why that is because leaders that don't pay attention inject all this other BS on top of their subordinates. So when I was a company commander, it literally was, I managed my company in combat with an effing whiteboard, and everybody knew the rotation. If you were a breach on the last mission, you're going to be assault. If you were assault on the last mission, you're going to be support. And then you're going to have a QRF section. And everybody knew that. And it was an SOP in the company. So guess what? After the first order, I never had to say, all right, guys, second platoon, you're going to rotate from this to this, because it became an SOP in the company and everybody knew what their planning priorities were based off of the mission that they previously executed, right? So that makes it easy. And that's the same thing in Ranger School. So if you have a SOP in place and everybody understands who's doing what, then it becomes pretty easy to, basically routinize the routine. You're eliminating all the other steps, not because they're not important, but because you have them down to the point where they're self-fulfilling, they're automatic, right? I don't need to tell you what's going to go into a security team, because I know I'm going to have a belt-fed weapon, a claymore, and an AT-4, right? I know I'm going to have that because that was the SOP that was established back in Darby. And then when you get to Florida, guess what? Florida is even less prescriptive than mountains, because guess what the RIs do in Florida? All right, Ranger, go for what you know. Here's your mission today. That's it, right?
Charlie Mike.
Everybody tells you, learn the Ranger Creed, learn the op order, learn the principles patrolling. That is a very simple way of Dale's prescription. Yes, learn the creed, learn the principles patrolling, learn the op order. But I will add to that, there's a difference between learning it and internalizing it. Understand what the creed is saying. Internalize what that creed means. Don't just memorize it. Live it. Apply it to your life. Because when the RI looks at you later and goes, third stanza of the Ranger Creed, you're not struggling to remember it, because it's who you are. The op order what kills especially young troops and young lieutenants with the op order is not understanding. And Rob, you can explain this much better than I can, because as an officer, you have to do this as just a matter of existence. Understanding what your higher headquarters is saying in their mission statement, and then taking that mission statement and applying it to because you're going to get a battalion or a company op order.
Yep.
You have to be able to extrapolate the information from that mission statement and say, okay, how does that apply to my platoon or my squad? So many people just sit there and regurgitate the higher headquarters mission statement, and it really doesn't mean anything to the platoon or squad. You have to extrapolate the information from that mission statement and then say, then your mission statement is, this is what first platoon is going to do. This is what third squad is going to do. Learn how to differentiate what is higher headquarters guidance and what is guidance for your particular element. And then apply, because if you understand how the higher headquarters mission statement applies to your element, then it makes your planning much easier, and you're not spinning your wheels on stuff that doesn't apply to you. That's point 2. Point 3, principles of patrolling. Anything you want to do in your patrol, if you weigh it against the standard of the principles of patrolling, you will never go wrong. And if the RI looks at you sideways, then you can look at him and go, because a lot of times he'll sit there and go, Ranger, why did you do third principle of patrolling, Sergeant? We did, X, Y, Z. And if you can explain it, not if you have a good RI, the RI will be like, okay, I'll buy it, go. And so if you learn those 3 things and internalize them before you go to school, you will academically, at least, have an advantage over the person that just can memorize it. The person that can spit out the 5 paragraphs of an op order. You can spit out the 5 paragraphs of an op order all day long, but if you don't know what each paragraph means and what information is pertinent to that paragraph and what that paragraph is meant to tell, then you just memorize some words. You haven't memorized the op order itself. That's Dale's food.
Yeah. So to wrap up real quick, and I just got a couple other points. So like on your 8-hour breaks, and this is one of the things that I did terrible the first time I went to Ranger School, and I was much better
at it by the time I got back. And that was, make sure you eat healthy, right? Because everybody wants to go and gorge themselves on freaking, McDonald's and Oreos, which is great because you're missing them because you haven't eaten those things in, weeks and weeks and weeks. But the best thing that you can do during your 8-hour break is find some healthy food. So like get a steak, steak and potatoes, healthier foods. Like if you're going to snack, have like Nutri-Grain bars or something healthy that's not going to, totally destroy your gut because your gut's already messed up because you've been eating MREs all the time anyway. But the other part of it is find something healthy, because whatever that healthy stuff is, that's going to give you a much better baseline going back into the course than if you eat a whole bunch of empty calories. And nobody will tell you that up front, but that we all know that's true because we lived it. The other part of it is make sure that you get your equipment fixed, and you have opportunity to call your family the night before. So if you get a chance to call your family before your 8-hour break, call them and tell them, hey, this is what I need, so they can pick it up for you so you're not wasting time while you're out, so you can maximize that 8-hour break spending it with your family. The other part of it is like if you don't like your family that much, take your 8-hour break and go to sleep. Sleep for a good 2 or 3 hours. You're never going to be able to, sleep when you can, because you can't always sleep, right? That's a rule that my squad leader taught me many, many moons ago, and it was one of those things that I carried with me throughout my career in the Army. But at the end of the day, everything that you do in Ranger School should be focused towards, getting everybody else their go, because yours will take care of itself. Go ahead, Dave.
Believe it or not all RIs are heartless pricks. Why is it important that you know that? Because sometimes they're going to give you cues, and it's best that you pay attention to them. I had one kid in the planning bay. He was about ready to head towards a huge swamp that we have in Darby. I don't remember. And I showed him on the map sitting there with a little pine needle poking at it, saying, hey, you see this spot right here? That's a great place for you to cross without totally tearing up your squad. Oh, of course, Sergeant, I see it. I see what you mean. I got it. Before hitting the LD, I told him again, don't forget about that place I showed you on the map. Yeah, I got it, Sergeant. Okay. We get out there on the ground and I grab him by his frickin' harness. You see that high ground over there? That's on the other side of that swamp. Do you understand? Yes, Sergeant. That dummy got down into that damn cut and he turned and he started walking into that swamp. You're talking about waist deep in summer, right? And I remember sitting there telling this kid standing next to me, I said, $20. I bet you this kid says he wants to turn around and I'm going to hurt his feelings. And sure as shit, what happens? We see that damn squad leader stand there. He takes his damn PC off his head. He starts scratching his ass. What do you think happened next? Hey, Sarge, I'm thinking about turning around. The fuck you are. Keep on going, stud. It's too late for that nonsense. You made your decision.
Yep.
He marched that whole squad 1.5 kilometers in waist deep water.
And there was no reason for it.
And he can't understand why and he came to me. He said, man, I don't understand why my squad peered me. Oh, no shit. Maybe you should have listened to me in the damn, in the damn planning bay.
Yeah.
So listen for them. They'll talk to you. They aren't without compassion and they'll help you.
Yeah.
Well, it's not only that, is I don't want to see him. I mean, I don't want to see him fail either. We're not in the failure business. I don't think anybody wants to see any of their students fail.
Yeah. You can't
absolutely.
You can't succeed if everybody is wiped out. And like, that's the thing that people, it's preservation of combat power. And that's what people don't understand. It's like, yes, all these long movements and everything else, it sucks. But the bottom line is I have to do it smart and I have to be tactical about it. And the reason why I have to be smart and tactical about it is because once I get to that ORP, I have 1 hour to transition into whatever operation that I'm doing, whether it be recon, ambush, or raid. And so if I'm not fresh when I get to that point, there's no way that I'm going to recover from walking, 4 clicks through chest deep water in an hour. My shit's going to be wet. Most people don't waterproof their stuff properly. There's going to be a whole bunch of other, lesser included crimes that
add weight to your rug. Yeah. Now your rug's weight. Guess what? It ain't 60 pounds no more. Now it's 80 pounds.
Yeah. And so those are things but those are all things that like you don't consider when you're dogged out tired. But the last thing that I will say, and so we can wrap this thing up and get off the call is, hey, look, when you finally make it to Florida, keep in mind, you have a 98% success rate in Florida. Once you get there, everything else is a dice roll. So like most students that make it to Florida normally graduate. However, it may be after a cycle. It may be after 2 cycles. It may be after, going back to the beginning and starting all over again. The main thing is just don't get discouraged because things are going to happen to you in Ranger School. And when things go bad, that's when we can truly see who's going to shine and who's going to rise to the top. Like if everything's going to hell in a handbasket, dude, I actually walked a patrol with my S4, who's a, good, smart kid, one of the smartest kids I ever worked with ever in my Army career. But when he got to Florida, his tactics sucked to high heaven. And I had the first sergeant look at me and he goes, hey boss, what do you want me to do about this? I'm like, why are you looking at me? Like he fucking sucks. Give him a no-go, right? It's not because I liked the kid or didn't like the kid. It simply was because he failed to execute on the standard. And that's one of the things that most people don't understand about the Ranger course as a whole. Nobody's out to get you because guess what? If somebody gets hurt or something gets injured, there's a mountain of paperwork that I got to fill out because Ranger fell off the side of a freaking mountain and hurt himself. Or, dude got bit by a snake or guys got lost in the woods. Like, dude, we can go in a whole bunch of other stories, but Dave was there when we had that one Ranger student that was sleepwalking, right? Kid pulled.
I was just talking about him not 2 days ago with me.
Right.
Dude just straight up dropped all his kit at the tree of woe and walked away.
And
man,
and it literally was because this kid wanted to go to Ranger School so bad, but he had a sleepwalking problem, and so he went to the PA and good on the PA for freaking trying to take care of the kid, but the least they could have done was gave us a phone call and be like, hey, watch Roberts because he sleepwalks. And like, we could have freaking tied a double-headed safety line to this kid so he didn't walk off in the middle of the night. Like, it literally...
2 days we looked for him. It's a miracle he was alive.
Shut down the operation. Like, I'm telling you, Bojangles is the place of freaking woe for freaking Lost Ranger students because that's where they found him. The Casita County Sheriff found this kid, looking all homeless and disheveled out in front of Bojangles. They bought him in.
Staring into space.
Yeah, they bought him in. They're like, it's got to be.
Yeah,
it's got to be. But yeah, that kid walked off, and like those are the things that happen. And like, make no mistake, if you're a Ranger student, if something like that happens, we are going to stop everything that we are doing to take care of you. And that's the thing that people don't understand. Man, I've set up AXPs in the middle of the road. I've landed helicopters and done ambulance exchange points in the middle of the training area to get kids out for like a hangnail. You know what I'm saying? Not like a hangnail, but like we have literally gotten kids out. I had a kid that had his appendix burst, and we used the JP on him, pulled him out of the swamp, and got him to the hospital before the patrol even did actions on.
And that's to your greater point. We still got to answer. I got to answer for every one of them. You know, I'm just not out there to, let's go screw with Ranger because, you know, I have a tiny penis. No, man, that shit doesn't happen.
Yeah. And that's the thing. And everybody assumes that, like, yeah, Ranger School is hard. Yes. Right. But the one thing is, it's a combat leadership course, but it's not combat. So we can't assume the same amount of risk that we would with soldiers when we're downrange. But regardless of that, we have gone about an hour. This has been a great discussion, guys. I think this is a little bit more information than what I was asked to give, but I also think it'll be very, very helpful to the audience because I do have some people that listen that want to know more. Go ahead, Dale. Fratricide, right, and security. Those three things will get you every time. If you drop those, you're pretty much done. Everything else, you know, it's negotiable. It just depends on, like, you can bounce back in a patrol if you have bad movement. You can bounce back from everything else, but those are three of the biggest killers that we would see. But we're going to wrap this thing up. We'll probably have to do another one. We'll have to do a part 2 a little bit later because, like, we have a lot of information on the course to talk about, and I think people will listen. Anyway, this has been Rob Robinson with Philosophy from the Frontline, and we will see you guys on the high ground. Thanks. Thanks for listening to Philosophy from the Frontline with Rob Robinson. We will bring you more interesting veteran transition stories, veteran advocacy, and more information in veterans transition in general on a podcast platform near you. This is Philosophy from the Frontline, and we'll see you on the high ground. Thanks.